Greetings, everyone. I hope you had a great week. And I'll try to make it a little bit greater now with some good news from China. A Chinese solar company announced this week that it had broken the world record in efficiency. Now, efficiency when it comes to solar panels is the proportion of solar energy that actually gets converted into electricity in the panel. And this company said it had succeeded in converting, wait for it, 26.81% of solar energy into electricity in its new panel. I told you, great news. That will make for some more great news in the coming years, hopefully. And we will even crack the storage mystery, how to make it affordable. Anyway, but while Chinese companies are breaking records in efficiency, European governments are trying to reduce their country's dependence on everything solar produced in China, because dependency on a not very friendly country is obviously not the best idea, although we could argue who's to blame for this unfriendliness and who actually makes the designation. But we won't, because today's topic is solar power and good news from the solar power field. So reducing the dependency on an external supplier of panels is good news. The challenge is how they're going to do it. I don't know how every European government is going to do it, but apparently Germany has an original idea. Now, in order to stimulate local production of panels, this is something that normally requires subsidies, but Germany has decided to, as I said, go the original way, and it has announced a 90% windfall tax on wind and solar generators. Now, you could say that the two things have nothing in common between them, but they actually do, because the windfall tax will provide much needed money for the country's budget, and it's the same budget that will be used for consequent subsidies for the solar industry, and specifically the solar panel industry that the government is trying to encourage, like other governments in Europe, because this is what you do to reduce your dependence on an imported good. You try to produce it at home. The problem with producing solar panels at home in Europe is the same thing that made China dominant. It's called energy costs. Because the production of solar panels is an energy-intensive process, as commentators and so-called experts like to say. But in fact, what energy-intensive process means is a process that requires huge amounts of heat, and this heat is most reportedly produced by fossil fuels, which is why experts say energy-intensive process and move on to bigger and better things. It's because of cheap coal that China is the dominant power in solar panels, and ironically, it is because of the price of coal that Europe will have a very hard time actually scaling local production to such an extent that it will no longer depend on China. We all know why. Because coal is expensive in Europe, just like gas is expensive in Europe. And because it is expensive in Europe, it has now become expensive across the world. Oil is expensive in Europe too, and is about to become a lot more expensive after December the 5th. Or even if not a lot, it will be more expensive. And that's bad news. But the problem with panels is coal, because not only do they require a lot of coal or any other source of intense heat, but if they are to be produced with coal, this means emissions. And the European Union has already missed its own emission targets so badly. It really doesn't need any more contributions in this respect. But the thing is that while Germany is imposing windfall taxes on its solar producers, it will probably use some of that money to pay solar panel manufacturers, whose solar panels will then go to solar power generators, who will be taxed with the windfall tax because the energy they produce is cheap. How does that sound for a vicious circle? Of course, it probably won't be so cheap, the energy they produce, and the windfall tax will have to be removed at some point because local production, as I said, will be quite energy intensive. And with the intensity of energy, there will be an intensity of costs, and these costs will have to be passed on to somebody. It cannot be passed on to the solar developer because their energy will no longer be so cheap as to be taxed with a windfall tax. So, who are these costs going to be passed on to? I'll let you have a guess. Meanwhile, have a great next week. Stay healthy, stay happy, and don't read too much news. See you next week.